A new bill would potentially eliminate the ability to be a dual citizen. Today, we're going to talk about what that means for families that have lived in both the US and Canada. Hello, my name is Brian Haggard. I'm a certified financial planner, chartered financial analyst, and I'm the founder of RetireMitten Financial. We help simplify your cross-border retirement plan. And with cross-border planning, things are always changing. For the last year or so, we've been recommending to a lot of our clients that they become US citizens, even though they've already are Canadian citizens, to help alleviate a concern that we have with a bill that was already proposed about 6 months ago. Now we're having to go back and talk to our clients about what would happen if this dual citizenship is not allowed. Today, we're going to talk about where are we? What is this new bill that's being proposed? Where do we stand today? How close is this to actually becoming a law? What are some of the implications if this does happen? And what are some planning strategies that you may consider if you're nervous about this impacting yourself? So, what is this new bill that is being proposed? It's called the Exclusive Citizenship Act of 2025, and it's being proposed by Senator Marino in Ohio. And ultimately, what this bill would do, if it were to pass, is it would ban dual citizenship for all US citizens. Now, before you get too nervous about this, for now, nothing has changed. You are still allowed to be a US and Canadian or dual citizen. That is not a problem. And quite honestly, likely this will not pass. It would still have to go to the House to vote on, still have to go to the Senate to vote on, still have to go to the president to vote on, probably would still have to get through the Supreme Court, which has ruled on this in the past. So there's a really good chance that this will never pass, but we want to at least bring it up because it's been a question that we've been getting a lot more from our, as you can imagine, a little bit nervous US and Canadian clients. So let's talk a little bit about the details of the new bill. Ultimately, the new bill would tell you that you can no longer be a dual citizen. So if you're currently a US and Canadian citizen, you would have to decide going forward if you'd like to remain a US citizen or a Canadian citizen. It would give you 1 year to choose the citizenship that you'd like to. If you don't choose, you would automatically lose your US citizenship. It also would, as you can imagine, eliminate the ability to become a US citizen in the future if you're currently a Canadian citizen. And there would actually be a registry of dual citizens out there. And if you gave up your US citizenship, you would now need a visa anytime that you were to visit the United States. Now let's talk about why, at least I don't think this will ever pass. Now, we certainly could be wrong about that, but it has an uphill battle, thankfully. Why it probably won't pass is this would be a huge loss of tax revenue. Currently, if you're a US citizen and you leave the United States, if you reside elsewhere in the world, like a lot of dual citizens might do, if you give up your US citizenship, you no longer would be required to pay US taxes. That's how most countries work. If you aren't a resident of the country, like if you leave Canada and you move to the US, you don't have to keep on paying Canadian taxes typically. Well, the US is very different in which everybody, if you're a US citizen, no matter where you go, you have to pay US taxes. If all of a sudden a lot of people gave up their US citizenship, that would be a lot less tax money coming in on a year to year basis. And so that way alone might deter people from signing off on this bill. Next is it would need Supreme Court approval. This type of bill has tried to go through the Supreme Court before in the past, and the Supreme Court has shot it down. Next, this would be a nightmare to administer. There's millions of dual citizens out there. To try to figure out how to go through and have all of these people renounce their US or other citizenship would be a complete pain in the butt to try to figure out. And right now, quite honestly, there's just not a lot of support for this bill either. So if you're really nervous about losing your dual citizenship, I understand, but the chances of this bill passing and becoming a law are probably pretty low. Well, what if it does pass is obviously the question. And there's two big impacts if this ultimately does pass. And the biggest impact would be if you gave up your US citizenship. Financially, that could be a big hit to you up front. And the reason why is if you give up your US citizenship, you are going to be subject to the US exit tax if you renounce your US citizenship and have over $2 million worldwide net worth. And that can be a pretty big hit. We help our clients plan for exit tax all the time because some of our clients give up their green card and move back to Canada. Now, the biggest issue with that is IRA accounts. If you have an IRA account, a pre-tax IRA account, and you're subject to the exit tax, you have to have a deemed distribution of that all of those IRA accounts. If you had $1 million IRA account, which is becoming more and more common at this time, and you were subject to the exit tax, you would have to pay, you would have that $1 million would be included on your final US tax return, and you'd have to pay a bunch of taxes on that money. The other issue with the exit tax is that if you have any unrealized capital gains, that might be on a vacation property, a rental property, it might be on stock, that those capital gains would become realized and you'd have to pay taxes on those capital gains as well if you were subject to the exit tax. It's unfortunately for people who are subject to the exit tax, it can be pretty costly for them to leave the country or give up their US citizenship. I mentioned earlier in this video that we've been suggesting for a lot of our clients that they actually go out and get their US citizenship if they're not already US citizens, if they're green card holders, even if they're thinking about going up to Canada. And why is that? A bill that came out earlier this year proposed earlier this year would eliminate Social Security for non-US citizens that are not living in the United States. So you could just imagine that you've worked here in the US for 20 years as a green card holder, you leave the US, move back up to Canada, you're no longer a citizen or national of the US, and then all of a sudden the US says, hey, we're taking your Social Security because you're not a citizen. So what we've been trying to do in order to eliminate that happening is recommending that our clients become US citizens to make sure they don't lose out on that Social Security. Now, again, we also don't think that this bill will ever pass either, but we want to make sure that our clients are protected if it does. Now, if you aren't a US citizen and you're because you can't be because have to give up that citizenship and now you're in Canada, there's a big fear that at some point you could lose out on that Social Security benefit. So that's another concern if this does pass. Now, what would I do if I was put in a position where maybe at some point I'd have to give up my US citizenship because either I live in Canada, I'm going to move back to Canada, or I just prefer to be a Canadian citizen as opposed to a US citizen? If that is your situation, probably the biggest planning opportunity that you can do right now is try to get as much money into Roth accounts as possible. That might be Roth IRA contributions, that might be Roth 401k contributions, it might be Roth conversions, but I would try to get as much money into Roth accounts as possible if you're nervous about this bill passing. And there's two reasons why. One, as I mentioned before, if you're going to be subject to the exit tax, Roth accounts make the exit tax much more easy to stomach because Roth accounts aren't, you don't have that deemed distribution. A deemed distribution of a Roth account is essentially zero anyway as far as taxes are concerned. And if you're feeling like this is going to push you back into Canada or another country, Roth accounts, at least in Canada, are recognized. You can withdraw US Roth accounts in Canada completely tax free. So if I was somebody who was nervous about this situation happening, I would try to get as much money into Roth accounts as possible. In summary, this bill, if it became a law, would be pretty devastating for many of the families that we work with. And so we're certainly hoping that this doesn't go through. And we're pretty confident that it will not pass. But at least it's important to talk about it so that you know what might be out there. And we're seeing, unfortunately, more and more bills that are passing like this that are unfriendly for families that have lived and worked in both the US and Canada. If you're somebody who's lived and worked in both the US and Canada and want to put together a retirement plan, just a financial plan, schedule a complimentary consultation in our link below, and we can talk to you about how we can help simplify your cross-border retirement plans. Thanks for listening today.